Elara races through the ancient woods as dusk descends. Her heart pounds a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She is searching for the first of the 25 silent guardians. The last light is fading fast. If she fails to record their legends before nightfall, the stories will vanish forever. The guardians themselves will disappear, and the world will lose their protective magic and wisdom. You will witness her desperate quest to save these fading myths from eternal silence. What ancient secrets do these silent watchers hold, and why must they not be forgotten? I am curious to know, where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? A gnarled oak stands before her, its bark etched with what looks like ancient writing. This is the Whispering Oak, the first silent guardian. Its leaves rustle with a language only a dedicated listener can understand. Elara kneels, her journal open, her hand trembling as she tries to translate the rustles into words. But she is not alone. Envious spirits, formless and cold, drift from the surrounding shadows. They resent her mission. This mortal capturing what they feel belongs only to the wild. Sharp, grasping thorns sprout from the earth around her, snapping at her cloak, trying to steal her pages or drive her away. Every rustle of the oak is a precious sentence, a fragment of the oldest story, and she cannot afford to mishear a single syllable. The thorns tear at her sleeves, the cold of the spirits bites at her skin, but her focus remains locked on the whispering leaves. She must choose. She can flee now and save herself, leaving the tale only half told, or she can risk everything to ensure the story is preserved in its entirety. Her hand steadies. She chooses to stay. Letter by letter, she fills the page, her voice a soft echo as she speaks the words aloud to confirm their truth. As she writes the final symbol, a profound calm settles. The Whispering Oak begins to glow with a soft, golden light, its story now safe, but the spirits do not fade. Their anger solidifies into a tangible presence. They are no longer just envious. They are now hunters, and she is their quarry. And in that moment of connection with the oak, a terrifying truth washes over her. These 25 stories are not separate fables. They are a single, woven tapestry of magic and memory. Losing one thread, one single story, could cause the entire fabric to unravel, dooming all the guardians to silence forever. She gathers her journal, the new weight of her task pressing on her. As she slips away into the deeper woods, a faint, melodic hum cuts through the oppressive silence, a gentle guide leading her onward toward the next guardian, the one known as the Stone Singer. The melodic hum led her to a clearing dominated by a single, moss-covered monolith. This was the Stone Singer, its surface a tapestry of worn grooves and embedded river stones. As Elara approached, it began to emit a low, rhythmic pulse, a deep vibration she felt in her bones rather than heard with her ears. The pattern was a code, a lock waiting for the right key. She studied the stones, her fingers tracing their cool surfaces until she understood. The sequence was a song, a simple but precise melody of taps. Taking a small rock, she began to gently strike the designated stones, one after another, her movements careful and deliberate. A single wrong note, a single moment of hesitation, and the legend would remain sealed within the stone forever. With the final, resonant tap, the monolith shuddered. A cascade of light, like liquid gold, flowed through its grooves, and a voice, ancient and deep as the earth itself, spoke a single, prophetic verse into her mind. It spoke of a great forgetting, a shadow that falls not from the sky, but from the hearts of mortals, a silence that unravels the world's oldest magic. It was not a full story, but a crucial piece of a much larger puzzle, a fragment that made the tapestry of her quest feel both more complete and infinitely more fragile. But the unlocking had a price. The ground trembled as a creature of jagged granite and soil heaved itself from the earth beside the monolith. This was no mere spirit. It was a territorial rock beast, awakened by the disturbance, and now focused entirely on the intruder. Its roar was the sound of a mountainside cracking apart. Elara's heart hammered against her chest as she scrambled backward, the newly learned melody already starting to fade from her memory under the onslaught of pure fear. She had to remember the song. She had to outsmart the beast. Thinking quickly, she darted toward a wall of towering cliffs, the rock beast crashing through the undergrowth behind her. She remembered the forest's own voice, its echoes. Shouting a sharp cry, she listened as the sound bounced back, distorted and multiplied. She did it again and again, creating a chorus of false targets. The beast, confused by the cacophony of its own pursuit, hesitated, its stone head swinging from side to side as it tried to locate the true source. In those precious, stolen moments, Elara focused, repeating the stone singer's melody under her breath, locking the rhythm and words into her memory until they were as solid as the monolith itself. The beast's furious roars did not subside. Instead, they seemed to call out, answered by distant, guttural cries from deeper within the forest. She had overstayed her welcome. The legends were fading at a terrifying speed, and every moment she spent surviving was a moment the next story slipped closer to oblivion. As she fled the clearing, the beast's bellows fading behind her, a new guide appeared. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and she spotted it, a fluttering, ethereal light near the edge of a murky, still pond. It was the Glimmer-Wing Moth, its wings catching the faint light like stained glass, waiting to share its own fragile tale. The Glimmer-Wing Moth pulsed with a soft, desperate light. Elara approached the murky pond's edge, her movements slow and deliberate. She held her breath, extending a steady, open palm. The moth, sensing her peaceful intent, fluttered hesitantly before alighting on her skin. Its touch was like a whisper of cool silk. Immediately, the luminescent dust from its wings began to drift and settle, arranging itself into intricate, glowing symbols on her hand. This was its story, a silent, visual language she had to decipher without moving a single muscle. The symbols told of a creeping decay, a shadowy blight born from forgotten promises and neglected bonds. It was this blight, not mere time, that was actively unraveling the Guardians, severing their connection to the world. As the final symbol formed, a shimmering cloak of the moth's own dust enveloped Elara, masking her presence from the envious spirits that still hunted her. For a few precious moments, she was invisible to her pursuers. Then, a treacherous gust of wind tore through the clearing. The fragile moth was thrown from her palm, its light flickering dangerously. Without a second thought, Elara threw herself forward, curling her body around the tiny guardian, using her own back as a shield against the gale. Twigs and sharp stones bit into her skin, but she held firm, a human bulwark against the storm. She would rather bear the pain herself than let this fragile story be lost to the wind. Her selfless act solidified the bond. The moth's light glowed brighter, and the protective cloak around her strengthened. But the Blight's presence was no longer just a story. All around the pond, the vibrant plants began to wilt and blacken, their life force draining away in visible, terrifying seconds. A cold dread settled in Elara's stomach. This corruption was spreading now, faster than she could record the legends. She had to warn the others. With its tail fully given, the Glimmer-Wing Moth rose, its light now a steady beacon. It led her away from the dying pond, drawing her toward a dense, dark thicket where the air was sharp with the scent of sap and danger. A formidable presence waited there, one who shaped the very forest into defenses. The Thornweaver was next. The thicket ahead was a living wall of brambles, each thorn a needle of polished obsidian. This was the Thornweaver, and it watched her with a stillness more menacing than any roar. Elara knew she could not fight her way through, nor could she afford to run. Its story was woven into those very vines, a living text she needed to read. She stepped forward, her hands open and empty, and spoke not a demand, but a request. She asked for its legend, for the memory it guarded. The brambles shifted, and a single, sinuous vine uncoiled, its tip hovering just before her face. It was not asking for words. It was asking for a part of her, a physical token of her commitment. Without hesitation, Elara drew a small knife, sliced a lock of her dark hair, and offered it to the waiting Thorn. The vine gently took the offering, weaving the strands into its own core. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, a deep, draining fatigue, as if a part of her own vitality had been siphoned away. The forest shadows seemed to grow darker, the sounds of pursuit closer. She was weaker now, more vulnerable, but the Thornweaver was satisfied. The wall of thorns parted just enough, and a new vine, this one dotted with tiny, budding flowers, extended toward her. As it brushed her forehead, the story flowed into her mind. It was a tale of ancient pacts, of a time when humans and the deep woods were allies, not strangers. It spoke of the Blight not as a mindless decay, but as a sentient hunger that fed on fear and forgetfulness. Every time a mortal turned away from an old tale, the Blight grew stronger. The thorns around her prickled closer as the story unfolded, not to harm her, but to test her. They pressed against her arms, her back, a constant reminder of the danger she was in, a check on her trust. She forced herself to remain still, to accept the tale and the testing thorns with equal grace. Her decision to cooperate, to offer a piece of herself, had been the only true path. Force would have left her shredded and empty-handed. This choice, though it cost her dearly, reinforced her core belief that these guardians were not foes to be conquered, but partners to be understood. The stakes were now terrifyingly clear. The enemy was aware, and it fed on the very emotion that clawed at her own heart. Her physical weakness was a new liability, a weight on her limbs that would slow her down as the forest's dangers closed in. Just as the Thornweaver's story concluded and the brambles receded, a sudden, graceful rustle came from the canopy high above. She looked up to see a cascade of autumn leaves spiraling down around her, though it was not the season for fall. Something moved with impossible agility in the high branches, a silent, observing presence. The leafdancer was watching. High above, the leafdancer moved in a blur of russet and gold, a creature of pure wind and motion. It left no footprints, only a swirling trail of leaves that hung in the air, tracing the path of its impossible dance. To earn its story, Elara could not simply listen. She had to participate. She had to join its silent ballet in the treetops. Taking a deep breath, she began to climb, her fingers finding purchase in the rough bark, her movements clumsy compared to the Guardian's fluid grace. The Thornweaver's draining toll made her arms feel heavy, each pull upward a small battle against her own weariness. Finally, she reached a sturdy, sprawling branch, the forest floor, a dizzying mosaic of shadows far below. Her heart hammered in her throat, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. The Leafdancer paused, observing her from a nearby limb, its form shimmering like a heat haze. Then it began its dance anew, a complex series of leaps, spins, and landings across a network of precarious branches. This was the test. Elara had to mimic its every move. She took a hesitant step, then another, her arms outstretched for balance. The wind tugged at her clothes, threatening to pluck her from her perch. She focused on the Leafdancer, letting its rhythm become her own. For a few breathtaking moments, she was part of the dance, her body moving in sync with the ancient pattern, a human echo of a forest spirit. She was almost in perfect harmony when a sudden, sharp crack echoed from below. Her focus shattered for a single, catastrophic second. Her foot slipped on a patch of damp moss, and she fell, tumbling through a veil of leaves before crashing onto a lower, thicker branch. A jolt of white-hot pain shot up her leg, and she knew it was badly bruised, if not worse. Gritting her teeth, she clutched the branch, fighting back tears of pain and frustration. But from her new, lower vantage point, she heard it, the wind, channeled through the specific path of the Leafdancer's dance, now carried a whisper-soft legend directly to her ears. It was a tale of migration and memory, of seeds carried on global winds to places they had never been before, a story of the forest's endless, quiet expansion. The dance had not been a barrier, but a key, a way to tune the very air into a conduit for its story. Her fall, though painful, had been the final step in understanding. As she lay there, catching her breath, a new danger revealed itself. Dark, vine-like tendrils of the blight, attracted by the sound of her impact, began to snake their way up the tree trunks. They moved with a horrible, purposeful slither, seeking the source of the disturbance. She had no time to rest. Pushing through the throbbing in her leg, Elara forced herself to stand. She looked down, gauging the distance to the forest floor. With a final, pained glance at the still dancing guardian above, she leaped from the branch, landing in a soft patch of ferns with a jarring impact that made her cry out. Limping, she pushed through a final wall of foliage and emerged into a serene, open space. Before her lay a body of water so still, it looked like a sheet of darkened glass. This was the Pool of Echoes, and its silent, reflective surface promised a legend unlike any she had encountered yet. The Pool of Echoes was a mirror of perfect stillness. Elara knelt at its edge, her own weary reflection staring back. The silence here was not empty, but expectant. She understood instinctively that this guardian did not give its story, it traded. Leaning forward until her lips nearly touched the water, she whispered a memory into the glassy surface. The story of the first time she heard the forest's hidden voice as a child. The pool drank her words, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single ripple spread from the center, and within its expanding circle, an image began to form. It was the legend of a past guardian, a great stag made of living wood, now long faded. The vision showed the stag's creation, born from the first alliance between the world's magic and the heart of the ancient woods. But the images were not clear. They shimmered and shifted, and as she watched, other, darker ripples crossed the surface. These new echoes carried distorted whispers, lies about the stag's pride and eventual betrayal. The blight was here, in the water itself, trying to rewrite the past. Her throat burned with a raw, scraping pain, the cost of using the pool, and her voice emerged as a ragged croak. She could not speak to challenge the lies. She could only listen with more than her ears. Closing her eyes, she let the echoes wash over her, feeling for the truth. The deceptive whispers felt cold and sharp, like shards of ice. The true legend felt warm, a resonant hum that matched the rhythm of her own steady heartbeat. Trusting that deep, intuitive pull, she focused only on the warm echoes, piecing together the real story of the noble stag. As the true vision solidified, a patch of the pool's surface beside her turned to sickly, inky black. The blight was not just hiding stories, it was actively corrupting them, twisting memory into a weapon. The realization was a cold dread in her stomach. This enemy could poison the past to ensure there was no future for the Guardians. A pure, resonant chime, like a crystal bell, rang out from the mouth of a nearby cave, its sound cutting through the polluted silence. The call was an offer of clarity, a sharp contrast to the pool's deceits. Pushing herself upright, her voice now a fragile whisper, Elara turned from the tainted water and moved toward the sound. The resonant chime led her into a cave, glowing with its own inner light. All around her, massive crystals grew from the floor and ceiling, pulsing with a soft, prismatic energy. These were the crystal veins, and their story was not spoken or shown, but fractured into countless beams of colored light, crisscrossing the chamber. To understand it, she had to align them. Her injured leg protested as she moved, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on the first crystal spire. Each one was incredibly fragile, and the slightest wrong pressure sent a web of cracks spreading across its surface. A low, ominous rumble shook the cave, and she watched in horror as veins of inkai, black corruption began to pulse within some of the crystals, shifting the light paths and creating a treacherous, unstable puzzle. She had to solve it before the entire structure failed. Her fingers trembled as she carefully turned a key crystal, its facets grinding softly. She was not just seeking a story, she was performing delicate surgery on the cave's very heart. One by one, she aligned the beams, and as they converged on the far wall, a coherent image began to form. It revealed the Blight's core, not as a mindless force, but as a centralized consciousness that fed on isolation and severed connections. This was its weakness. It could not endure where bonds were strong. In her moment of triumphant discovery, a sharp crack echoed above her. A corrupted crystal shard broke free from the ceiling and sliced deep into her arm. She cried out, clutching the bleeding gash, but she did not flee. The story was almost complete. Gritting her teeth against the fresh wave of pain, she used her good arm to make the final, crucial adjustment. The full legend blazed on the wall, a map of the Blight's vulnerability, shining in brilliant light. The cave rewarded her sacrifice with the truth, but it also punished the intrusion. With a deafening roar, a portion of the ceiling gave way, sealing the entrance she had used and trapping her inside. The Blight's corrosive presence intensified, the black veins in the crystals throbbing with angry energy. She was cornered, injured, and surrounded by a collapsing, poisoned sanctuary. Coughing in the thick, sparkling dust, Elara scanned the crumbling walls for any hope of escape. Her eyes, stinging from the particulate light, caught a faint glimmer behind a newly exposed fissure. Forcing her way through the narrow gap, she found not a dead end, but a descending tunnel, dark and cool. The air that flowed from it carried a new sound, the faint, overlapping murmur of countless hushed voices. She had found her way out, and it was leading her directly into the grove of whispers. The overlapping murmur of the grove was not a single sound, but 1,000 tangled threads of speech. Elara stepped into the circle of ancient, silver-barked trees, and immediately the whispers pressed in on her from all sides. Each tree held a fragment of the same legend, and to understand it, she had to listen to all of them at once, weaving their disparate phrases into a single, coherent truth. It was a mental tapestry, and she had to hold every thread without letting a single one slip. Beneath the true whispers, a lower, insistent murmur slithered through the roots, the Blight's voice offering convenient lies and simplifications that promised an easier path to understanding. She closed her eyes, blocking out the visual chaos of the shifting leaves, and focused only on the sound. The story began to form, a tale of a time when the stars themselves sang to the earth, and the guardians were born from that celestial harmony. The legend spoke of a ritual, a convergence of all 25 voices that could restore what was being forgotten, but the effort was immense. Her mind felt stretched thin, a drumskin about to tear. The whispers became a roaring cacophony in her skull, a storm of conflicting pitches and tones that threatened to shatter her concentration completely. She was losing the thread, the story dissolving back into noise. Gritting her teeth, Elara did the only thing she could. She sank to her knees, placed her hands flat on the cool earth, and forced herself to meditate. She focused on her own breathing, in and out, using the steady rhythm as an anchor in the auditory tempest. It was a desperate act of mental discipline, a reclaiming of her own center amidst the chaos. The cacophony did not quiet, but her ability to withstand it grew stronger. Just as the true story began to solidify again, a new whisper cut through the rest, clear and compelling. It sounded like the Thornweaver, offering a crucial piece of the ritual she seemed to be missing. A surge of relief washed over her, but it was followed immediately by a cold dread. The Thornweaver was far behind her. This voice was an imposter. The Blight had learned to mimic the Guardians, to exploit her trust and lead her astray. Her confidence in her own senses, the very tool she relied on most, was suddenly and profoundly shaken. How could she finish this quest if she could not believe what she heard? In that moment of paralyzing doubt, a different whisper, faint but pure, brushed against her ear. It was the simple melody of the stone singer, a rhythm too true and deep to be counterfeited. It did not speak words, but offered direction, pulling her gently toward the grove's edge. Stumbling, her mind still reeling, Elara followed that one genuine thread. She broke through the final line of whispering trees and into a small, moonlit clearing. There, basking in a single, brilliant beam of lunar light, stood a guardian of smooth, warm rock, its surface inscribed with symbols that seemed to drink the illumination. This was the Sunstone Guardian, waiting silently in the night. The Sunstone Guardian's surface glowed with a soft, steady light, a captured piece of the moon itself. Elara approached, her bleeding arm held tight against her chest, and placed her uninjured hand upon the warm, smooth rock. Immediately, the absorbed moonlight poured out, not as a simple beam, but as a liquid radiance that flowed across the ground, illuminating a ring of hidden runes carved into the earth around the stone. These were its legend, a history of solar and lunar devotion, now visible only in this sacred light. But the moment the runes shone, the blight reacted. Inkai shadows, thick and cold, crept from the edges of the clearing, slithering toward the light, trying to smother the runes and plunge them back into obscurity. Elara threw her cloak over the advancing tendrils, using her own body as a shield, desperately keeping the circle of illumination intact long enough to rid the final symbols. The runes revealed a crucial truth. The blight was not just a passive decay, it was a creature of pure void that feared and hated untainted light. As a reward for her defense, the Sunstone's energy transferred to her, cloaking her in a gentle, protective glow. This newfound protection was immediately tested. From the darkened tree line, shadowy figures began to converge, their forms indistinct, but their intent clear. They were drawn to the light, not in reverence, but with a hunger to extinguish it. They clawed at her protective glow, their touch like ice, each swipe diminishing its brilliance. Knowing she could not stay, Elara made a choice. She would not just take the Guardian's knowledge, she would leave something behind. Pressing her glowing finger against the trunk of a great oak, she focused all her will and carved a single, shimmering rune of warning, a beacon for any who might follow this path. The act of creation drained the Sunstone's gift further, and her protective glow flickered precariously. The blight, enraged by her defiance, retaliated on a grand scale. It was as if a great, invisible hand smothered the forest. The ambient moonlight, filtering through the canopy, dimmed, then died, plunging the woods into an unnatural, profound darkness. Her own faint glow was now the only light for miles, and it was fading fast, shrinking to a faint shimmer around her wounded form. As the last of the light ebbed, leaving her vulnerable in the oppressive dark, her eyes, adjusted to the faint luminescence, caught a subtle shift in the undergrowth. A patch of ferns, no different from any other, seemed to inhale, its fronds trembling with a silent, hidden breath. The Fern Shadow Guardian was right beside her. The ferns beside her were breathing. Elara froze, her own faint glow extinguished, her body pressed low against the cool, damp earth. She had almost missed it entirely. The Fern Shadow Guardian was not a single plant, but a collective consciousness woven through the entire patch, its presence revealed only by the subtle, synchronized tremor of its fronds, and the way the dew upon them refracted the faint starlight into impossible, minuscule rainbows. To earn its story, she had to become as still and observant as it was. She held her breath, her eyes tracing the patterns of moisture, reading the legend in the silent language of condensation and movement. The story that unfolded in her mind was one of quiet erosion. The blight, it explained, did not always attack with claws and shadows. Its most effective weapon was simple neglect. It fed on the moments when a person walked past a beautiful flower without truly seeing it, when an old tale was left untold, when a memory was allowed to fade. This passive forgetting was the fertile ground in which the Blight's roots took hold, spreading not with a roar, but with a sigh. As the final piece of the tale settled within her, a practical knowledge surfaced, a technique of blending her energy with the forest's own background hum, a cloak of stillness that went beyond mere hiding. It was a gift of true stealth. The lesson was immediately vital. A twig snapped in the near-total darkness, followed by the low, guttural growl of a large animal. Then another and another. Shapes moved at the edge of her vision, their eyes glowing with a sickly, yellowish light. A pack of wolves, their fur matted with the same Inkai corruption she had seen in the crystals, their snouts lifted, sniffing the air for her scent. They were hunters, and she was their prey. Her heart screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but remain motionless. But the Fern Shadow's teaching was clear. Confrontation was what the Blight wanted. It would feed on her fear and violence. She made her choice. Closing her eyes, she focused on the technique, consciously lowering her heartbeat, softening her presence until she felt like just another part of the forest floor, a stone, a root, a sleeping fern. The corrupted wolves padded into the clearing, their growls vibrating in the air. One passed so close, she could feel the heat of its corrupted breath on her neck, smell the rot clinging to its pelt. It paused, sniffing the ground where she had knelt just moments before, its head cocked in confusion. She was there, yet she was not. The Blight had turned the forest's own children against her, proving its invasion was nearly complete. After an eternity of tense silence, the wolves moved on, their frustrated snarls fading into the trees. Elara did not move until the last sound had disappeared. Rising slowly, she felt the new stealth technique settle around her like a second skin. Using this borrowed invisibility, she slipped away from the Breathing Ferns, her path now drawn toward the faint, familiar sound of flowing water. The river of memories was calling, and its currents were said to hold every story the forest had ever known. The river's current flowed not with water, but with liquid light, carrying glowing orbs that pulsed with forgotten tales. This was the river of memories, and Elara knew she had to wade into its heart. The moment she stepped into the luminous flow, a profound chill seeped into her bones. It was not the cold of water, but the icy touch of oblivion itself. Each glowing orb she carefully plucked from the current contained a shard of the Guardian's origins, a vital piece of the puzzle. But with every fragment she collected, the river pulled something back from her. The current whispered soothing lies, urging her to let go, to rest, to forget the weight of her quest. Her mind, already strained from the grove of whispers, began to fray at the edges. She reached for another orb, her fingers closing around a vision of the first Leafdenser, learning its dance from a hurricane. And in that triumphant moment, a terrifying void opened in her mind. She could not remember her own name. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was the collector, the seeker, but who was she? The mission itself began to blur, its purpose fading into the river's mesmerizing glow. This was the Blight's most insidious attack yet, not with claws or shadows, but with a gentle, inviting nothingness. Thinking quickly, her hands trembling, she fumbled in her pack for a length of resilient vine she had taken from the Thornweaver's domain. With frantic, deliberate knots, she tied it around her wrist, each loop a physical anchor. This was not a simple bracelet, it was a story string, a tactile map of her purpose. She tied a knot for the Whispering Oak's first words, another for the Stone Singer's melody, a third for the Glimmer-Wing's sacrifice. Running her fingers over the knots, the memories flooded back, solid and real. Her name, Elara, returned to her in a dizzying rush, but the recovery had cost her precious minutes. As her focus returned, she saw the river's nature change. Inkai tendrils of corruption now swirled in the currents, polluting the orbs with distorted half-truths and angry echoes. The blight was poisoning the source of memory itself. The once gentle current grew violent, trying to sweep her off her feet and carry her downstream, where she could see the darkness already spreading toward the next unseen guardians. Fighting the pull, she half swam, half stumbled toward the bank, hauling her body onto the solid ground, gasping and clutching her story string bracelet like a lifeline. As she lay there, shivering and spent, a soft, rhythmic hooting echoed from the branches above. 4 pairs of luminous, unblinking eyes peered down at her from the high canopy. The Watchful Owls had been observing her struggle, and now they offered a silent, knowing gaze. 4 sets of luminous eyes watched her from the branches, their gaze ancient and unnervingly patient. These were the Watchful Owls, and as Elara pushed herself up from the riverbank, they took flight in a silent, coordinated dance. Their patterns were not random, they were a map written in the air. She followed, her steps quick and quiet, trusting their guidance to a secluded grove high in the rocky cliffs. There, they landed in a perfect circle around her, and their legend began. It was not spoken in words, but in a complex language of synchronized hoots, head tilts, and the specific rustle of their feathers. One owl would hoot a low, resonant call, and another would answer with a series of rapid clicks, while a third tilted its head exactly 90 degrees to the left. It was a story told by a council, and she had to piece together the meaning from the chorus. The tale they wove was one of unity. The blight, they revealed, was a master of division, isolating each guardian to weaken them. Its true vulnerability lay in coordinated action, in the combined strength of all 25 voices. As a pledge of their belief, the lead owl dipped its head, promising to scout the path ahead for her, to be her eyes in the darkening woods. Just as the final, intricate sequence of their story was being conveyed, a single, piercing screech shattered the calm. Every owl snapped its head toward the east. The lead owl fixed its gaze on Elara, its large eyes reflecting not fear, but a stark and urgent warning. A blight storm was coming, a physical manifestation of the corruption, and it was moving fast. She had a choice. She could demand they finish their tale now, risking being caught in the open, or she could trust their warning and seek shelter, leaving the legend incomplete. Her decision was instant. She trusted them. Gathering her pack, she scrambled toward an overhang the owls indicated, her heart hammering against her ribs. The storm hit with a roar of unnatural wind, carrying not rain, but a biting, black dust that withered everything it touched. She huddled under the rock, listening to the forest scream. When the silence returned, it was deeper and more profound than before. The lead owl returned to her, its feathers ruffled. Through a series of solemn gestures, it delivered the devastating news. The storm's path had been a direct assault. Several of the remaining guardians, their locations now scouted by the owls, had fallen completely silent. Their stories were gone, erased from the world forever. The race was now a desperate salvage operation. With the owls gliding silently ahead as her guides, Elara moved with renewed urgency. They led her toward a place they called the Mossy Heart, a guardian rumored to possess the power to heal not just the wounded land, but the very legends themselves. It was a fragile hope, but it was the only one she had left. The mossy heart pulsed with a weak, fading light, its surface a carpet of soft green moss that felt like a living lung struggling for air. Elara knelt before it, her own body a mirror of its exhaustion. There was no time for gentle persuasion. She placed her bleeding hands directly onto the cool, damp stone and closed her eyes, pouring every last reserve of her energy into it, channeling the stories she had collected back into its core. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a single, powerful thrum resonated from the stone, a heartbeat that shook the ground. Another followed, and another, until its rhythm synced perfectly with her own frantic pulse. A wave of pure, verdant energy erupted from the heart, a visible ripple of green light that washed over the clearing. Where it passed, the blackened plants greened again, and the oppressive weight of the blight recoiled, hissing like steam. But the effort cost her everything. Her legs buckled, and she slumped against the stone, her vision swimming, her body utterly spent. The blight would not tolerate such defiance. From the shadows, thorny vines, thick as pythons and dripping with a sticky darkness, shot forward. They did not target her. They coiled around the mossy heart itself, squeezing, trying to crush the newly restored life from it. A cold fury cut through Elara's fatigue. She would not let this victory be stolen. Using the last dregs of her strength, she crawled forward, her injured arm screaming in protest. She clawed at the vines, her bare hands tearing at the sharp thorns that bit deep into her palms. It was a desperate, brutal struggle, one she fought not as a collector, but as a guardian. She was protecting this story with her own flesh. One by one, she ripped the constricting vines away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The mossy heart's pulse strengthened beneath her touch, its light steadying. But the healing wave was already receding, the blight gathering its strength at the edge of the clearing for another assault. Her body had nothing left to give, a hollow vessel, and in that emptiness, she felt a new danger, a whispering temptation to simply lie down and let the silence take her too. As she leaned against the warm stone, trying to catch a breath that would not come, the sky above her began to change. A single, luminous line of silver light streaked across the darkness, then another and another, weaving an intricate, glowing pattern against the stars. The Sky Painter had begun its work. The Sky Painter was a being of pure light, weaving a celestial tapestry across the dark canvas above. It gestured with a luminous limb toward a cluster of night-blooming flowers, their petals glowing with captured starlight. These were its pigments, and they needed to be gathered. Elara's exhausted body protested as she moved through the undergrowth, her hands gently plucking the radiant blossoms. Each one was cool to the touch, pulsing with a soft energy. Together, she and the Sky Painter began their work. Elara would crush a flower, releasing its unique hue, and the Guardian would dip its ethereal brush into the color, streaking it across the sky in broad, beautiful strokes. The constellation they painted was its legend, a story of cosmic artistry and the ancient balance between the heavens and the earth. As the first stars of the new pattern ignited, a wave of pure, clean hope washed over the forest. The nearby tendrils of blight recoiled, withering under the gentle celestial light. But that very light became a beacon for something else. A chittering swarm of blight-mutated bats descended from the surrounding peaks, their leathery wings tainted with the same Inkai corruption, their eyes fixed on the glowing painting. Elara had to continue her delicate work while dodging their frantic dives. They swooped at her hands, trying to disrupt the creation of the pigments. One bat screeched past her face, its claws snagging her sleeve, while another tried to snatch a freshly picked flower from her grasp. In that moment of chaotic defense, an idea sparked. The story the sky painter was telling was one of solitary creation, but her entire journey had taught her the power of connection. With a final, decisive stroke of glowing indigo, she did not just replicate the ancient pattern. She added a new symbol, a single, interlocking knot at the heart of the constellation, representing the unity of all the guardians. As the symbol flared to life, the entire constellation shone with a brilliance that stunned the bats into a momentary retreat. But the blight was adapting. One of the creatures, instead of attacking her, flew directly into a patch of the freshly painted sky. Where it touched, the light did not just scatter, it turned a sickly, bruised purple, the blight learning to mimic and poison the very essence of the Guardian's power. The bats renewed their assault with a frightening new purpose, and though Elara and the Sky Painter fought them off, several key strokes of their masterpiece were scarred by the corruption. The legend was preserved, but it was now marked by the struggle. As the final star in the constellation settled into its place, a single, focused beam of light descended from the sky, cutting through the forest like a luminous blade. It pointed unerringly toward the distant roar of a great, unseen cascade. The mists of the Hidden Waterfall called to her, promising both sanctuary and the next fragile story waiting to be heard. The roar of the waterfall was a physical force, a thunderous curtain of sound and spray that masked her passage completely. Elara pushed through the icy deluge, the water plastering her hair to her scalp and her clothes to her skin. For a moment, she was blind and deaf, fighting the powerful push of the current. Then she stumbled through to the other side, into a cavern of breathtaking silence. Here, the air was still and cool, and the walls glittered with untouched crystals. This was the sanctuary of the Hidden Waterfall, and its guardian, a being of shimmering, liquid light, pulsed gently in the center of the cavern. Its story was one of profound isolation, of choosing to hide away from a world it felt was forgetting it, building a fortress of solitude to preserve its own purity. But that isolation had become a prison of loneliness. The waterfall's roar, which had protected it, also made communication nearly impossible. Elara had to press her forehead against the Guardian's cool, light-filled form, the vibrations of its tail traveling directly into her mind. It was a story of resilience, yes, but also of deep sorrow. As the legend unfolded, a new danger revealed itself. A faint, greasy mist began to seep through the waterfall, tainting the pristine air. It was blight-saturated, carried on the very spray that had hidden her. The sanctuary's perfect isolation was breached. The mist coiled around the Guardian, causing its light to flicker and dim. Shouting over the waterfall's roar was useless, so Elara made a different choice. She closed her eyes and did not just receive the Guardian's story, she gave her own. She pushed her memories of the other Guardians toward it. The Whispering Oak's first words, the Stone Singer's deep melody, the Glimmer-Wing's fragile sacrifice. She shared the warmth of their connections, the strength of their combined purpose. This act of shared memory, of trust, solidified their bond. The Guardian's light flared brighter, pushing back against the encroaching mist, its resilience now fueled by companionship instead of fear. But the mist was spreading, threatening to contaminate this last pure place. Elara knew she had to find a way to purify it, to seal the breach before the corruption took root. With a final, shared pulse of understanding, she turned back to the roaring curtain of water. Pushing through once more, she emerged into the dim forest light, gasping and shivering. Her eyes immediately fell upon the Pathfinder Badgers, their normally methodical digging replaced by a frantic, desperate scrabbling at the earth. Their urgent signals were clear. Something was terribly wrong. The Badgers' frantic digging was a language of pure panic. They were not just digging, they were trying to breathe. Their tunnel home collapsed by the same blight storm that had stolen the other Guardians. Elara did not hesitate. Dropping to her knees, she joined them, her hands clawing at the heavy, damp soil alongside their powerful paws. It was brutal, exhausting work, the earth fighting back with roots and stones, but together they cleared the blockage. In gratitude, the lead badger, its fur streaked with silver, began to scratch a new map into the dirt with its claws. This was no ordinary chart. It was a living document scented with musk and marked with dug symbols only she could now follow, a direct route to the few Guardians still holding on. The path was a gift, but the warning was grim. The blight had seeded the way with hidden traps. They moved with new urgency, the badgers sniffing out danger ahead. But the corruption was cunning. A seemingly innocent patch of leaves gave way, and a snare of thorny, black vines snapped shut around the hind leg of the youngest badger. Its cry of pain was a sharp, terrible sound in the tense silence. Elara froze. Every instinct, every story she carried, screamed at her to run, to reach the next Guardian before it was too late. But the badger's suffering eyes held her. She made her choice. Kneeling in the dirt, she ignored the ticking clock in her mind and placed her hands on the trembling creature. She closed her eyes, reaching for the lingering echo of the mossy heart's energy within her, focusing on the memory of its restorative pulse. A faint, green warmth flowed from her palms, soothing the inflamed wound, coaxing the vicious thorns to retract. It was a slow, delicate process, and with every passing second, she felt the opportunity to save the next Guardian slipping through her fingers like sand. Her sacrifice sealed her leadership, but the cost was devastating. As the last thorn withdrew and the badger limped free, a distant, silent scream echoed through the forest's magical web. Another light, that of the Guardian they had been racing toward, was extinguished. A palpable wave of despair washed over the Badger clan, their heads drooping, their digging claws still. The mission felt hopeless, but the healed young badger, licking its leg, looked up at Elara with unwavering faith. It nudged her firmly away from the main path, toward a grove shrouded in a soft, mournful sound. It was the sound of falling water, but not a waterfall. It was the sound of tears. The weeping willow awaited, and its sorrow held a power all its own. The weeping willow's sorrow hung in the air like a physical weight, its drooping branches tracing lines of grief in the earth. Elara approached, her own exhaustion, a dull echo of its profound sadness. She knew words were useless here. Instead, she found a large, sturdy leaf. cupping it carefully beneath a branch where crystalline tears fell in a steady, soft rhythm. She drank. The tears were cool and surprisingly sweet, a balm that flowed through her veins, mending her bruised leg, closing the gash on her arm, and washing the mental fatigue from her mind in a single, clarifying wave. Her body felt renewed, but her heart now ached with the willow's own burden. As her strength returned, the branches above her began to sway in a specific, mournful pattern, their movement sketching a legend of deep betrayal in the air. The story was one of a sacred pact, a vow made among the first guardians to always stand united. But one of them, in a moment of pride and fear, broke that promise, choosing isolation over unity. That first fracture, that initial act of distrust, was the seed from which the blight first sprouted. It was not an external invader, but a sickness born from within their own ranks. The weight of this revelation was a crushing sorrow, threatening to drown Elara's newly found clarity in a sea of despair. She felt the tempting pull to simply lie down and weep forever, to join the willow in its endless mourning. As if sensing her vulnerability, gnarled roots, tainted with the familiar Inkai blackness, erupted from the soil, coiling around her ankles with bruising force, trying to pull her down into the dark, silent earth. She fought against them, not with physical strength, but with a promise shouted into the rustling leaves. She vowed to find a way to mend the broken promise, to restore the unity that had been shattered. Her words were a spark of hope in the grove of grief. The willow's branches stilled, the sorrowful swaying ceased, and the roots, which had been dragging her down, loosened their grip and retreated back into the ground. The guardian had chosen to believe her, but this crucial knowledge came with a terrible price. Understanding the blight's origin made her a direct threat to its existence, a target for its full, vengeful fury. She was no longer just a collector of stories. She was the one who knew its secret shame. Energized and resolute, Elara left the sorrowful grove behind. Where her feet, now cleansed by the willow's tears, touched the forest floor, a trail of small, vibrant flowers sprouted in her wake. This path of rejuvenated flora led her eyes upward, to a disturbing sight in the deepening twilight. The Firefly Chorus, normally a synchronized ballet of light, was flickering erratically, their collective song of illumination falling into dissonant chaos. The Firefly Chorus flickered in a frantic, desperate panic. Elara saw the problem immediately. Their individual lights were brilliant, but their flight paths were chaotic and uncoordinated. They were trying to tell their story all at once, creating only a blinding, confusing glare. She needed to conduct them. Spotting a fallen branch coated in the same radiant moss from the Sunstone Guardian, she snatched it up, and it glowed softly in her hand, a makeshift luminescent wand. Raising it high, she began to trace slow, deliberate patterns in the air, directing the fireflies not as a chaotic swarm, but as a single, cohesive choir. One by one, then in groups, the tiny insects fell into formation, their bodies tracing intricate, glowing words against the dark canvas of the night. The legend they spelled out was one of pure harmony, a tale that proved light was strongest when it moved together. As their flight paths synchronized, their combined brilliance flared into a powerful, cleansing radiance that burned away the nearby blight shadows, causing them to wither and vanish with a faint hiss. For a glorious moment, the air felt clean and full of hope, but the blight would not tolerate such unity. A sudden, vicious wind tore through the clearing, a gale with a malicious will. It whipped through the fireflies, scattering their perfect formations, threatening to blow them apart and plunge the story back into dissonant chaos. Elara's heart sank as their beautiful words dissolved into meaningless streaks of light. She could not fight the wind with force. Instead, she made a choice. She closed her eyes, pushed aside her fear, and began to sing. It was not a complex song, but a simple, unifying melody, the same one she had hummed to herself for courage since she was a child. Her voice, still a bit rough from the pool of echoes, rose clear and steady, a rhythmic anchor in the storm. She sang of connection, of trust, of holding fast. One by one, the fireflies, buffeted by the gale, heard her song and latched onto its rhythm. They stopped fighting the wind individually and began to move with it, their bodies swaying in a unified dance, their lights pulsing in time with her melody. She was not just conducting them anymore, she was singing them back into existence as a chorus. The wind intensified, howling now with a palpable fury, tearing leaves from branches and whipping Elara's hair across her face. This was no natural weather. The blight was learning, adapting, manipulating the very elements to break the bonds it feared most. It could turn the air itself into a weapon. The realization was a cold knot in her stomach. If it could command the wind, what else could it control? As her song finally stabilized the Firefly Chorus, their collective light burned brighter than ever before, a defiant beacon against the oppressive dark. The intensified glow did not just illuminate the clearing, it pierced through it, revealing what had been hidden in the deep shadows at its edge. There, tangled within the massive, above-ground roots of an ancient, colossal tree, was the entrance to a dark, winding passage. The light glinted off wet, twisted wood, hinting at a complex maze waiting below. The Labyrinth Roots had revealed itself. The Labyrinth Roots twisted around her, a living prison of wet, gnarled wood that groaned and shifted with a mind of its own. As Elara stepped into the passage, the walls immediately began to close, sealing the entrance behind her. A low, resonant voice, seeming to come from the roots themselves, spoke a single, cryptic riddle into the oppressive silence. She had to answer correctly to proceed, and with each solution, a section of the root wall would peel back, whispering a fragment of the Guardian's legend into her ear. This was the story of the forest's own memory, a tale of how the land itself remembers every footstep and every promise ever made, but the maze was a jealous storyteller. A wrong answer made the roots constrict violently, the air growing thin and the passage narrowing until she could barely squeeze through. To make matters worse, a fine, shimmering dust of blight spores began to drift from the ceiling, clouding her mind with doubt and fear, making the simplest logic feel slippery and distant. Her thoughts grew muddled, the answer to a riddle about the phases of the moon dancing just out of reach. In that moment of panic, her fingers flew to the story string bracelet on her wrist. She traced the knot for the Sunstone Guardian, remembering its connection to lunar light, and the answer became clear. She spoke it aloud, and the roots retracted just enough to let her breathe and move forward. This pattern repeated, a brutal cycle of mental combat, where her past learning was her only weapon. The maze was not just testing her knowledge, it was testing the very connections she had forged. With the final, most complex riddle solved, the labyrinth shuddered to a halt. The full legend of the Labyrinth Roots settled in her mind, a complete history of the Earth's enduring memory. In the center of the now still chamber, a single, luminous seed pulsed with a soft, green light, lowering itself into her waiting palm. This was the ultimate reward, a sacred seed that held the potential to grow into a new guardian, to replace one of those that had been lost. But the maze had one last trick. The roots began to grind together, sealing the final exit, determined to keep its prize and its new occupant forever. Elara had to plant the seed before the first rays of dawn, or its vital magic would fade into nothing. She clawed at the closing wall, her muscles straining against the immense pressure of the living wood, fueled by the desperate need to deliver this fragile hope to the outside world. She burst free just as the roots snapped shut behind her, collapsing into a serene, moonlit meadow. The air was cool and still, and the grass beneath her felt like a soft blanket. Above her, spanning between two graceful birch trees, a web of impossible complexity glistened with dew, each strand holding a tiny, captured dream. The Dreamweaver spider waited patiently in the center of its silver tapestry. The Dreamweaver spider's web was a tapestry of captured starlight and forgotten dreams. It gestured with one delicate leg toward Elara's hands. Understanding the unspoken request, she slowly extended them, palms up, and held them steady as the spider began its work. Silken threads, cool and impossibly fine, wove around her fingers and wrists, connecting her directly to the Guardian's consciousness. Instantly, her mind was flooded with a cascade of shared visions. She saw the original gathering of the 25 Guardians, a celestial convergence where they forged a pact of mutual protection, their combined voices creating a shield of pure magic around the world. The legend was breathtaking, but the crucial revelation was devastatingly clear. This original pact was the only thing that could defeat the Blight, and it had to be recreated. The knowledge settled deep within her, and as the web dissolved, it left behind a new, humming sensitivity in her mind, an enhanced intuition that felt like a compass, pointing toward truth. But the path to that truth was a treacherous one. The shared dream was a double-edged sword. As the spider wove, the Blight infiltrated the visions, twisting them into a personal nightmare. Elara was trapped in a cycle of her own failures, watching herself arrive too late at each Guardian's side, hearing their stories crumble into dust just before she could record them. The despair was a physical weight, threatening to pin her in that endless loop of hopelessness. At the same time, Blight-influenced beetles, their carapaces gleaming with a sickly purple hue, scuttled up the web strands, their sharp mandibles snipping at the vital threads, trying to sever the connection before the full truth could be passed to her. She was caught between a psychological prison and a physical attack. Elara had a choice. She could recoil, tear the web from her hands, and escape the nightmare, saving her own sanity, but losing the essential knowledge. Or she could lean into the terror. With a surge of courage, she did the latter. She stopped fighting the nightmare and instead observed it, studying its patterns, learning from her imagined failures. She accepted the psychological danger as the price for the spider's gift. Her stillness and acceptance broke the nightmare's hold, and the final, pure vision of the Pact flooded into her. The last thread fell away just as the final beetle was severed from the web by the spider's own quick strike. The cost of the encounter was high. The beautiful web was left tattered and damaged, its creator already beginning the slow work of repair. Elara's new intuition buzzed urgently inside her skull, a fragile but persistent guide. There was no time to rest. The Blight knew she possessed its secret now, and it would throw everything it had left at her to prevent the Pact's recreation. She had to find the remaining guardians with a speed that felt impossible. Trusting the unfamiliar feeling completely, she let the internal compass pull her gaze upward, past the canopy, toward the distant, wind-lashed peaks. Her enhanced senses picked up a voice that was not a sound, but a feeling of immense pressure and clarity, a call that swept down from the highest stone. The summit wind was speaking, and it would not wait. The climb was a battle against the sky itself. Elara scaled the forest's tallest tree, a colossal sentinel whose upper branches were whipped into a frenzy by the summit wind. Each handhold was a test, every gust a shove from an invisible hand, trying to pluck her from the bark and send her tumbling into the void below. She could feel the wind's story swirling around her, a chaotic symphony of pressure and motion, but she could not grasp its meaning. Then the Blight answered her ascent. The sky, already turbulent, curdled into a violent storm. Lightning forked, not of electricity, but of pure darkness, striking nearby branches and splintering them into blackened shards. The wind howled with a new, malicious intelligence, tearing at her clothes, trying to break her grip. She wrapped her arms and legs around the shuddering trunk, her face pressed against the rough wood, memorizing the wind's song even as the storm tried to deafen her. She made a desperate choice. Instead of clinging to the melody in silence, she began to sing the fragments aloud, her voice a ragged counterpoint to the gale. Each note she vocalized carved itself deeper into her memory, a physical act of defiance against the chaos. Her voice, already strained, grew raw and hoarse, each syllable a scrape of pain in her throat. The ritual's success now hinged on a voice that was failing. Below her, a massive branch, scorched by the dark lightning, cracked and fell away, leaving the tree wounded and unstable. Her own breath was as ragged as the wind, her body battered and trembling with exhaustion. But as she sang the final, unifying note of the wind's legend, the storm faltered. For one crystalline moment, the air stilled, as if the Blight itself was listening to the completed song of unity. The reprieve was brief, but it was enough. With the final piece of the ritual secure in her mind, she had no strength left for a careful descent. She half climbed, half slid down the ravaged trunk, the bark tearing at her palms and clothes, until she landed in a jarring heap at the base. Gasping for air, she pushed herself up onto her elbows, her throat burning. The ground beneath her vibrated with a deep, resonant, and steady rhythm, a powerful heartbeat that rose through the soles of her feet. She had fallen right at the roots of the final guardian, the earth drum. The earth drum's heartbeat pulsed up through her feet, a deep, grounding rhythm that cut through the frantic fear in her chest. This was it, the final piece. Elara knelt, placing her raw, bleeding hands upon the giant, exposed roots that formed its surface. Closing her eyes, she focused, recalling the chaotic symphony the summit wind had taught her. She began to strike the roots, her palms creating a resonant, booming cadence that was not just sound, but a call to arms. Each beat was a pulse of pure intention, a thread of connection sent racing through the forest's magical web. Far and wide, the remaining guardians heard the call. The whispering oak's leaves rustled in time. The stone singer hummed its deep note. The Firefly Chorus pulsed as one. Their individual lights, which had been guttering like dying candles, suddenly flared with renewed strength, drawing together into a collective, shimmering aura. The forest itself seemed to take a deep, steadying breath, but the unity was a direct threat the blight could not ignore. The corrupted earth before the drum heaved and split, and from the fissure rose a formless, seething entity of pure void. It had no face, no limbs, only a swirling, silent hunger that lashed out at the drum, its touch leaving behind blackened, dead wood. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could not stop the rhythm, not even for a second. As a tendril of nothingness shot toward the drum's heart, she made a choice that tore at her very soul. She threw her journal, the precious book filled with every story she had fought to record, directly into the attack's path. The pages, inscribed with the Whispering Oak's first words and the Glimmer-Wing symbols, absorbed the blow, disintegrating into a cloud of ash and lost ink. She had sacrificed her life's work, the very goal of her quest, to protect the chance for a greater victory. The blight entity recoiled from the flash of purified memory, but it was only enraged. It swelled in size, growing larger and more defined. With every beat of the drum, it failed to silence. The unified light of the Guardians flickered in response, their collective song wavering as the void's pressure intensified. Elara's arms burned with fatigue. Her throat was raw from singing the wind's song, but she drove her hands against the roots again and again, the rhythm becoming her entire world. As the drumbeats reached a thunderous, world-shaking peak, a brilliant, converging wave of energy erupted from every corner of the forest. The 25 Guardians, those present and those whose echoes remained, focused their combined power into a single, incandescent spear of light aimed at the heart of the void. The blight entity, facing annihilation, gathered every shred of its corrosive power for one final, desperate assault. The light of the Guardians converged into a single, blinding star, centered on Elara. Her raw voice wove the summit wind's melody with the earth drum's thunderous rhythm, a song of unity that shook the very roots of the world. The blight entity, this creature born from a broken promise, swelled with a final, desperate surge of power. It was a storm of silent agony, a scream of isolation that had festered for eons, and it lashed out not to conquer, but to make everything feel its profound, endless hurt. In that incandescent moment, a choice crystallized in Elara's mind, as clear and sharp as the crystal shards that had cut her arm. She could use this gathered light as a weapon, a spear of pure energy to annihilate the void forever. Or she could use it as a bridge. She remembered the weeping willow's tears, the story of that first, prideful betrayal. Destroying the blight would only be another act of violence, another broken connection. It would not mend the original fracture. It would not heal the sorrow that had festered into this monstrous hunger. Her song faltered for a single heartbeat, and then it changed. The melody softened. The rhythm became a gentle, rocking cadence. She stopped singing a battle hymn and began singing a lullaby of understanding. She did not push the light against the darkness. She drew it around the entity in a warm, forgiving embrace. She channeled the legends not as weapons, but as memories of friendship, of pacts made under starlight, of a time before the loneliness began. She wove the blight's own painful history, its origin in a single act of fear, into a new story. It was a legend of forgiveness, a tale that acknowledged the hurt but refused to be defined by it. The void thrashed against this impossible kindness, this refusal to fight. It could comprehend hatred and fear. It fed on them, but this compassion was a poison to its very essence. The brilliant light did not burn it away. It dissolved it, untangling the knotted threads of its anguish. The silent scream became a sigh. The seething darkness softened into a shimmering gray mist, and then into a gentle, warm rain that fell upon the forest. Where the drops touched, the blackened scars on the land faded. Withered plants straightened, their leaves flushing with vibrant green. The corrupted wolves, now cleansed, shook their coats and melted back into the shadows as simple, wild creatures. The balance was not just restored, it was renewed, made stronger by the memory of the fracture that had been mended. The collective light of the Guardians dimmed from its blinding intensity to a soft, permanent glow that settled over the woods like a second dawn. A profound, healthy silence returned, filled not with absence, but with peace. Elara stood at the center of it all, her hands still resting on the earth drum, her body trembling with the aftershock of the choice that had saved everything. She had given up her journal, the physical proof of her quest, but in its place, she held something far greater. The stories were no longer ink on a page. They were alive in the air, in the soil, in the very heartbeat of the world, forever remembered because she had chosen to remember even the darkest chapter with compassion.